This happened a couple of years ago when I was about 17. I had gotten home from school and wasn't feeling well, so I spent the rest of the day just laying around on the couch. By about 8 p.m., I was feeling even worse and decided I should just try to sleep whatever it is off. So I go to my room and get in bed and then pass out pretty quickly. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I suddenly woke up in my pitch black bedroom and all I could think was, I'm going to die right now. My body was so weak, the room was spinning, and my body felt like it was on fire. I look over to the edge of my bed and, sitting on the edge is my grandmother, who had just died a few months ago. She pats my arm and then says to me, "It's gonna be okay. Just call for your dad. Try it. Call for your dad." So I start calling for him, and it felt like an eternity, but he finally burst through my door and then asked me what's wrong. I look over, and my grandmother's gone now. After that, he gets me up and he takes me to the ER, where I have a fever of 106 degrees Fahrenheit, which explains a lot. I had to get a ton of fluids and a shot in my hip, but eventually I felt a little okay. Her being there just felt so real to me. It was weird. I know logically she wasn't, but it just felt so real. That sort of messed with my head a little. I loved her dearly, and her death was very sudden. We kept her ashes in a really nice urn in the house under a painting that she had done herself. When I got home and passed by it, I just said thanks to her. I know it was probably just the fever melting my brain and maybe some sleep paralysis too, but still, it made me question the afterlife and all those sorts of things. For what it's worth, I really hope it was real. I've told this before, but about 7 years ago, I was at my mom's house and this white car pulls into the driveway. We weren't expecting anyone, so I assumed they were lost and needed directions, and I went to the door. A woman in her 50s or 60s got out, along with a 9 or 10-year-old girl. It kinda surprised me because I expected the kid to stay in the car if they just needed directions. I opened the door, and the woman kind of nudges the girl towards me, both of them with big smiles plastered all over their faces. I said, "Hi, what can I help you with?" She asked if I was Sarah, and I said yes. She told me they went to a neighbor's house looking for me, and then they pointed her to our house. They just kind of stared at me expectantly, like I was supposed to know the girl and be happy to see her. When I didn't react, the woman told me that they were there to see the dentist. No dentist here. Small ranch-style house in a fairly rural neighborhood. Yeah, there's no dentist here. Not anywhere near us. The woman and the girl just kept smiling. They didn't look confused, they just kept saying, "Are you sure about that?" Finally they left, and later on, I asked the neighbor who directed him to our house, and she said that she never told the woman my name, that the woman asked for me specifically. It's always kind of haunted me. I really feel like I was supposed to know that little girl. Like this would be someone trying to introduce me to a child that I didn't know I had. I honestly started wondering if I was nuts and had given up a child for adoption or something. It was a really strange feeling. My mom firmly believes that the girl will come back someday to tell me what it was all about, and I think about it very frequently. It drives me insane to wonder what they really wanted. My grandfather had been in World War II and told us about when himself and a few other soldiers had been separated from his unit and were trying to get to Normandy. They had gone through a clearing in a wooded area but had to drop when they heard something approaching. They were on their bellies in low grass when they saw 20 or 30 German soldiers running across the clearing very clearly in a state of panic. Then they just froze in mid-step. He said that they resembled statues and that some weren't even touching the ground and that there was no noise whatsoever. That even the birds themselves had gone silent. After a few seconds came a very loud noise, like metal scraping on concrete, and the frozen soldiers started to become blurry to the point that they just vanished without a trace. This had been reported by all of the soldiers that were present, and all were called to the War Office in London after their return to the UK, where they were pressed on what they saw over the period of a few days and were taken back to the same spot in France shortly after the war had ended. Surprisingly, when they got there were other men sharing the same accommodation who reported similar occurrences in the same exact area. They were all taken to the woods and had to describe where and how the events took place. My granddad said that the entire area was guarded very heavily and that part of the ground was heavily excavated. The strangest things of all the other that he said was that there were hundreds of dogs in the area, just milling around for no apparent reason. They returned to the UK with a gag order, ordering them to never speak about any of this. He went back to the same spot in France before he died in 1985 and said that the area had been covered with unmarked warehouses and was guarded by an unusually professional security company. He reckoned they were military, but he wasn't really sure. I've tried to find out more about this, but can't really find any records of it whatsoever. But I do remember one of the guys who he was with the day that it happened. He used to come and visit sometimes. He referred to the place as the Splintered Woods. Definitely pretty creepy. I used to visit my grandparents' house with my father every Sunday. There was a very odd family that lived a few houses down from them. They had a massive property in the middle of old Pasadena. The house had 3 stories, a basement, and a huge backyard. I was introduced to the little girl that lived there at some birthday party. We would sit on the side of the house and go looking for 4-leaf clovers. She told me she liked to play in the backyard barn, but nobody was allowed to go back there anymore. She promised me that there were a ton of animals there, and I loved animals, so I of course wanted to go. She said that we had to be very quiet and fast, but she would show it to me. We had to follow this little trail maybe a 1/4 of a mile behind the house. There was a ton of foliage around the trail, and it blocked out the building, and there was a big barn back there. It was pretty massive and really something you would see out of a movie. She said that it had been in the family for a really long time, but the barn looked pristine. When we approached it, she told me that we had to be very quiet and that we couldn't go inside. We started playing around the barn, but not directly next to it. We started looking for clovers again for a while, before I remembered that she mentioned animals. When I asked if we could see them, she didn't say anything but did get up and start walking towards the barn. The grass was overgrown right up against the barn, which didn't really make any sense because it looked brand new. The rest of the area was cleared out. The grass was only overgrown up near the barn. She then started digging through the grass like she was looking for something, but she wouldn't tell me what. The longer I stood next to the barn, the more uncomfortable I got. I felt like we were somewhere that we weren't supposed to be. I became a little distracted and started looking around for our parents or some adult to just jump out and scold us. When I turned around again, there was a big pile of bones sitting on the ground. I looked up at her and she was holding a very small skull in her hands. It looked like it would have belonged to a sheep, but way smaller. She then leaned in and whispered, "This is why we can't play back here. My mommy said he doesn't like animals anymore." I'm not really sure why I wasn't freaked out by that. Once I noticed the bones, I could see them scattered all throughout the grass. We heard her mom call for us and we ran back. It wasn't until a year or so later at another birthday party that I was in the backyard again. I asked her mom if we could go play by the barn, and she just kind of looked at me like she'd seen an alien or something. She said they never had a barn. The trail to it just disappeared. There were big trees there and everything. Something really weird happened with the adults after that, hence I wasn't allowed to go to their house anymore. I have no idea what happened. It was creepy. I asked my father a few years back if he had ever seen that neighbor's barn. He had no idea what I was talking about. Why would there be a barn in the middle of a big city? I just have no idea what happened, but every time I think about it, it still gives me the creeps. When I was 15, I was home alone hanging out upstairs in my bedroom. At the time, we had 2 small dogs. I was sitting in my room watching TV when the dogs started going crazy. They were barking downstairs very loudly. Now, it wasn't uncommon for them to bark when a person walked by or came to the door, so I just stayed in my room and thought nothing of it at first. They kept barking non-stop for probably about 10 minutes before I finally got fed up and decided to go downstairs to tell them to stop it. The stairs in my house led into the kitchen, and as soon as I reached the bottom, that's when I saw him. A very tall man in a pea jacket and a top hat stood in the doorway between my kitchen and the dining room. I could see no face. I bolted back upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, where I then called my parents. In the time that I was waiting for them to come home, I began hearing several seemingly aggravated male voices outside of the bathroom door. I was absolutely terrified. Eventually, my aunt arrived at my house to check on me, and the voices had faded, and I was able to calm down. About 2 years ago, I got a phone call from my mother telling me that she had been reading the local newspaper and that there was an article in it about my childhood home, and that it was written by the town historian. The house was built in 1805 and had once been a local gathering spot for the elite of the small village. The first floor had once been a parlor and a tavern of sorts, while the second floor of the house functioned as a dance hall. Things in this house had been rearranged a bit. The staircase, being one of those things, had been moved from what was now a second floor bedroom closet, which would exit downstairs between the kitchen and dining room. My family was slightly aware of this, but never had the exact details of it. Very cool, I thought. That is, until my mom continued reading. In 1836, there was an accident. 3 men got into an argument about their differing political views, 2 of them against the other. The disagreement ended with the third man being pushed over the railing at the top of the stairs, landing at the base of the stairs, where he slowly suffered from, and eventually succumbed to his injuries. The spot where he died was the same exact spot that I had seen the faceless man in the top hat almost 15 years ago. My mom clipped the news article and my father framed it and hung it in the dining room, right near the doorway into the kitchen. An hour later, while my father was home alone, he heard a crash. Upon investigation, he had found the clipped article in its shattered frame, laying face down, 15 feet from where he had hung it. I always knew that what I had seen and heard was supernatural. Now you'll never convince me otherwise. You'll also never convince me to stay in that house alone ever again. Yeah, definitely not happening. By my hometown, there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was around 19 to 20 years old, and we were crawling around and found a cave that was pretty deep. We had never been in there before and had never seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out, even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around in which light we had, we noticed that it was really clean inside the cave, as in it didn't have beer cans littered all over the place like all of the other small caves did. While inside the cave, we all began to get a really eerie feeling, hearing weird and strange things. Feeling like we were being touched, poked, and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others, although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back once we had flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered, it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours while inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights in the next week, but have never been able to find this cave again. I really don't know what to think about it. It really creeps me out. I have a lot of really weird experiences in my life that made me question reality, but this is my most recent weird one. My mother died about 1.5 years ago. My stepdad couldn't handle it, so he packed up and left their house. He let the mortgage company take it back, and it sat empty since she passed. The house is on a hill, and they have a huge barn in a field below the house an acre away. About a few weeks ago, my sister who lives down the road from the house called me and told me that the lights were on in my mom's bedroom, and all of the barn lights were on as well. Hours passed, and her husband decided to go up the hill to the house. He walks in the door and walked to the light switch to shut off the lights to the barn. He switched the barn lights off, and literally all of the lights went off. The inside and the outside lights just shut off at the same time. He freaked out a little bit and switched it back on, but there was nothing. No lights, no power, no anything. He then turns around and then leaves as fast as he could. The power had been off for over 1 year at that point. We assumed the mortgage company had turned on the power at first, but they haven't. The service is still off. There were probably about 12 lights running on that phantom power. I'd like to add some extra information and some additional weirdness. My mother died in her room. My sister keeps having dreams of her asking for food or water. I can't really figure out what caused the lights to be on. My grandfathers on both sides were master electricians, and my father and my mother and stepfather were also electricians. I was also an electrician for many years, so I don't really have a good explanation for this. My best guess is water got into the outside meter box and caused a connection across the plastic-covered meter blades, then made a temporary short, but once he flicked off the barn light switch, it broke the connection and couldn't continue powering the inside light that was on, and then couldn't reconnect after he flicked the switch back on. It hadn't rained in a week when that happened, so it doesn't really make any sense, and it's all I can think of to explain it as not some supernatural weirdness. If any of you have a better explanation, I would really love something rational so I can understand it. My irrational side says to go to the barn and investigate. My mother is sending a message. My last bit of oddity is about a guitar string. About a week after she passed away, I woke up and went into the bathroom to pee. I stepped out of bed and a guitar string wrapped around my foot. The guitar string was a flat-wound E string. That E string came from a set that was inside a guitar case from another room. It was a very specific type of string, and it's unmistakable. I haven't opened that case in years, and it wasn't in my bedroom. My mother bought me that guitar when I was a teen. I really have no idea what to think of any of this. If you have any answers, please let me know. I'm a TA in our college's anatomy class, which takes place in the Cadaver lab. Dead corpses. Late one night, I'm working alone in the Cadaver lab, and I start to hear a noise. It's hard to tell what the noise sounds like, but it's like a consistent muffled noise. So I kind of walk around the room and locate it. Now normally, the bodies are all kept in these big metal crates, but at that time we had one more body than we did crates. So one body was in a plastic body bag, and that's where the noise was coming from. So I'm terrified at this point, all alone in the lab looking down at this plastic body bag that I can see the outline of the body that presumably is coming back to life because it is definitely making noise. I stood over this body for a solid minute, debating whether I should open the bag, and finally the noise just stops. I got all of my things together and bolted from the lab. I don't really know what to think, but That was one of the creepiest nights of my life. There was an old man who lived on the same road that I drove every day to get to the highway. He always sat on his front porch drinking his morning coffee, and he always waved at me when I drove by, and I always waved back. This went on for the better part of a decade. One day I was talking to my neighbor about how much Mr. So-and-so waving to me made my morning so awesome, and I was really glad that he was still kicking around. My neighbor then says to me, "Wait, what? He's been dead for about 3 years now." After that, I never saw him again. So I guess my question is, who the heck was I waving at? I woke up in the middle of the night having to pee really bad, and from my position on the top bunk, I could see into the hallway. The bathroom was right across the hall from my bedroom door, and also right in my vision. I was just starting to move to climb down and go to the bathroom, when I then saw, heard, and felt the footsteps of a man coming down the hall and going into the bathroom. I thought that it must be my dad, but that was kind of strange because he and my mom had their own bathroom. Even stranger, he didn't turn on the light or close the door. So after a while, I got annoyed because I really had to go, and I called out to him. No answer. So I finally climbed down and switched on the lights, and I just find an empty bathroom. I had definitely seen a figure, heard the footsteps, and felt the vibrations of the footsteps of a large man come down the hall and go in there. I was only about 10 years old when this happened, but I still remember it so vividly because it's the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me. I've never really believed in the paranormal, but I don't know. Going through something like that really makes you wonder. When I was just old enough to not need a babysitter after school, I was home alone on one summer day. My parents, who would not be back until later, made me promise to lock the door and not answer the door to any strangers. I did this religiously, as I was also anxious about being in the house alone. There was a hefty bolt on our front door, and I was to make sure that I used it. I would see my folks come home and know how to unlock it. So I'm in the house playing with my Legos upstairs. I then hear the unmistakable sound of the front door open and close. I even felt the percussive thud that was so familiar as the door closed. Thinking one of my parents must have come home early, I then went down there to greet them. No one there. I then saw the bolt was still across. Now my blood runs cold as I start racing through the possibilities to explain this. I check all of the doors and windows in a panic. All locked. It was a standard 4-bedroom family house, not a mansion. Easily checked. Now I'm all alone in the house, so how the heck is the bolt across? It's absolutely impossible to open that door from the outside. Key or no key. I'm sure it was the door I heard. The house was silent and it was a very loud and distinctive noise. It did not compute. I noped out of there really fast and went to a friend's house. He didn't really believe me and he was certain I was winding him up. But I promise, I was absolutely terrified, and to this day, I still have no idea how to explain it. Hey everyone, thank you for taking the time to listen to today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have your own personal scary story or experience, be sure to submit them to my website at southerncannibal.com. Stay safe everyone, and remember to always stay hungry.